The whole thing about it takes a village, is really something that I believe with community development. And then how are all the different voices heard and listened to? Because we can also empower people like youth to have their own gatherings. We were talking about, United for Youth and, how we can sort of get that leadership development for youth, going again in our community, but also working together in an integrated way. Because there's times when you need to be able to do it on your own, but then there's times where you want to come together as a community with healthy adults and other natural supports and good environments that can create these opportunities. Because after all, these young people, we want to set them up for success. They're going to be running our city one day. And we want to make sure that they have every opportunity, to reach their full potential.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with Karen Young, the CEO of the United Way here in Calgary. Karen, you're such a community advocate, passionate about people. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Connie. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, I'm excited about the conversation for people to learn a little bit more, maybe about you to start.
You bet.
You've been working in community for a long time. Where did you start?
Well, it's kind of interesting, because we moved to Calgary kind of in the late 70s. And at that time, I was kind of, in my teenage years. And so I really got involved with my own community. And I started volunteering and doing like volunteerism as a junior leader for things like day camps. Then I got involved in being like a recreation leader for summer programs. And then I started teaching gymnastics and dance and just some different things like that. And I started taking some leadership development training and really started to learn more about community, went to university. And then one of my first jobs was doing community development in some of our neighborhoods in Calgary, working really closely with community associations, really helping them build a core of community volunteers that would run their association or would run, programs for their community. So that's kind of how I got started.
I did not know that it started with you as a young person.
Yeah.
I love that because I find we have a youth leadership program in our community.
Yeah, nice.
And I instantly thought of them when you were sharing your story and how inspiring it would be. I'm going to show them this podcast.
Sure.
That you started youth leadership and now you're the CEO of the Calgary United Way.
Yeah, and that's what I tell a lot of people that I'm mentoring. You just never know, where your path's going to take you. And you hear a lot about, Calgary Wild and women in sport. And so how it really starts young. And a lot of it does start with getting involved in recreation or sports or the arts. And really that's how it is. You kind of follow your passion and then you just can kind of see your winding road and where it's going to take you one day.
And is this one of the reasons why you are passionate about young people?
I really think it is because I just had so many opportunities as a young person myself. And then people would sort of take me under their wing. And so I was given a lot of wonderful opportunities, to try my skills and to learn and grow. And I just became passionate, about leadership and about empowering people. Helping people get a sense of connection and that sense of belonging, in the neighborhoods that we're in, but really helping residents, get empowered to do it themselves and to take personal interest in their own neighborhoods and their own communities.
Oh, wow. So how does that happen? How does someone get that kind of motivation to want their community to look different and feel different?
Sure, I used to remember, some of my mentors, and it was really about bringing people together around common causes, that they might have in their neighborhood. And in fact, we would do things like do a walk about your neighborhood. What is it that you like about your neighborhood? Where is it that there's opportunities, to improve it, to improve the appearance, to improve the access to services and programs, and then how can you get involved, as a resident to do that. So one of the initiatives at United Way is called our Community Hubs Initiative, and it's really using resident engagement, community development, where residents feel empowered, to take responsibility, to pull together, the saying neighbors helping neighbors, and to really pull together around the things that are great about their community or the things that they want to improve. And Sonalta community is a good, example of that too. There's a young worker there, Jenny Vickers, who's really taken Sonalta to new heights. They're building a huge addition now. They're building a community kitchen so that people can look after their own food security. They're building a social enterprise, a coffee shop that will help pay for their programs and services. They have a community garden. And so that's an example of a community really listening to the needs of the people in their community, understanding their demographics, and then really pulling together as one to create a neighborhood that you're proud of and you feel like you belong.
What an inspiring story that is.
Yeah, it's just amazing, what these communities can do when they're empowered.
So what would you say to anyone listening who is in a community who would love to start something like that?
Yeah, I think for me, what I would always encourage people to do is get involved with your community association. If you really haven't gotten to know, it's usually a volunteer board that comes together. Get to see what's going on in your community. If you have something you're passionate about, you can offer to help. The other thing that's really bubbling in Calgary, and it's always been there, is sort of grassroots groups. And so the idea of getting to know what's going on from a grassroots perspective, whether it is something around food security or whether it's around English as a second language or a cultural group. But we have so many grassroots groups in Calgary, so you can get together around a geography of a community, but you can also get together around a community of interest, where people have something in common and that they're passionate about. And if you can kind of find out what's going on in your own area, you can really come together with like-minded people, feel that sense of connection, and then really contribute in a healthy way. And that's kind of what we do at United Way, is bringing people together around these important issues and making a big difference, trying to make change, trying to make systems change, to create a resilient community where everyone has an opportunity to live a good life.
Yes, that's one thing I love about what you do, because someone like myself alone or someone listening by themselves, we can only do so much.
That's right.
But when you think about systemic change and governmental change and change that is bigger, the United Way is a great way for people to feel connected to that kind of change, as well as grassroots.
Yeah, I think we're trying to look at that whole spectrum. But what's neat about United Way this year, Connie? We're celebrating 85 years. And so that's the same age as my mom. And so my mom was born in 1940, and, so was United Way. And, at that time it was coming out, World War II. It was called a community chest. And it's kind of really evolved over the years to be responsive to the community. It's a network of local United Ways, all across Canada, all across the world. But what makes United Way so special is that it's hyper-local, so it's right here where we live, work, and play. And so there's so many opportunities to get connected to the causes that you care about. Last year, there was over 15,000 volunteers that worked together with the United Way Network and our agency partners, whether they were getting involved in days of caring or volunteering in their communities. And there's so many ways, to learn about your community and to get involved.
I love the hyper local. It's funny, when I think of United Way, I don't think of United Way in Vancouver or Toronto. I think Calgary.
Yeah, because that's your United Way, right?
Yes.
Yeah, my United Way.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And yet it is a global organization. But I love that it keeps true to the city that it's in, at least what I notice with Calgary and how you engage Calgarians. And so I've had a chance to be in the room at some of your campaigns,
Yeah.
and watching the electricity in the room of organizations who are choosing to get on board and bring their whole workplace, rallying everyone together. Tell us a little bit about what you do for campaign.
Yeah, well, it's such a great job because I really get to see what a can-do city Calgary is and what a city of community builders we are. Because if you think of all these workplaces, that can get involved in United Way campaigns, there's probably anywhere between 600 or 800, workplaces that'll get involved, in any given year. And what I really love about it is they're really trying to find ways for their employees to learn about what's going on in their community, how to get engaged and to be part, of that change, and then figure out what philanthropy means for you as an individual. And then they're able to raise funding so that we're able to get that funding out to programs, that can really help our most vulnerable, or it could be towards some of our larger initiatives, which they might be personally passionate about. So sometimes a workplace will support our community impact fund, which is our safety net funding, that it's there when you might need it. Or sometimes they might want to support something like community hubs that I talked about, or our newest initiative, Planet Youth. But what I love about the DNA in Calgary is this, spirit to come together, to leave no one behind, and to give people a leg up when they need it the most, and to think about it as more upstream. What can we do to prevent these problems in the first place? And how can we rally around work that's more prevention upstream, but also to be here when there is an affordability crisis or to help lift people out of poverty, but really looking at that whole system of care and making sure it's downstream, but also upstream, looking at that prevention aspect.
Yes, that is so important, the prevention, because I do feel we do see a lot of effort around the reaction to poverty or mental health, but the prevention. I love the fact that you dream for what's possible. That's one of my favorite things about you, Karen. It's what I admire so much. You are a waymaker. You're not afraid to rally the troops. I often, when I think of you in my head, I think of this woman who's rallying everyone and she's just charging forward. And I know that there's probably a lot of, there's highs and lows to all of it. But you've really advocated for a new program, that Planet Youth. You'd mentioned that.
That's right.
I would love to share, have you share about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's important that there are people in our city that want to be that beacon of hope and optimism. And when we talk to people, they really want to see that there is hope, that there is opportunity for the future. So it's just a real honor for me to be able to play that role. And we all know how tough it was during the pandemic on our youth. We saw our youth, really suffer in terms of the lack of connections that people were feeling, the lack of belonging, that screen time that people were having, more opportunities for substance use. And so we were seeing some of those patterns starting a little bit before COVID. COVID had really exacerbated that. And so we had been looking kind of around the world because, why really reinvent? You can do innovation, you can do a made in Calgary solution. But we came across the Planet Youth program. And so we got in touch with the guidance program in Reykjavik in Iceland and just learned about some of the incredible things that they had been able to do as a community by taking a primary prevention approach, by focusing on changing the environment, by which young people were growing up in, so a community development approach, and not focusing on trying to change their behaviors, but trying to increase positive factors that young people might experience in their domains, whether it was school, whether it was community, whether it was with their family or other peers, and sort of decrease sort of those negative factors that you might experience as a young person. And we really got excited, about that. And so we brought the Planet Youth Guidance Program folks to Calgary, and we had a big symposium up at the University of Calgary, brought many agency partners, government partners, researchers, donors, all together in a room. And then we decided, what? We should do sort of a Made in Calgary solution for Planet Youth just right here in Calgary. And so then we got to work, really rolled up our sleeves, looked at what would it take to do some fundraising for a pilot? How can we mobilize the community, to get involved? And so here we are a few years later, and we've been able to raise, over 27 million of the 26 million goal that we had. We've identified 4 priority neighborhoods together with the school boards. The University of Calgary Matheson Center is a research partner. Dr. Paul Arnold is leading that for us. And then we're working with agencies like the YMCA Calgary, Trellis, Masconawa. There's going to be an Indigenous parallel. And we've worked on a survey that will go through these pilot communities to grade 10 students. So we've just launched that survey. The results are going to be coming in here, and we'll be working with Iceland and with the University of Calgary to get all those results. And then we're taking it back to community. So we're going to go to these community action teams that we've created, with residents, parents, teachers, agencies, researchers, youth themselves, and look at these results to say, okay, what is it that we need to do to really make a difference in these neighborhoods and create, psychologically safe environments for young people? Can young people access recreation opportunities and have opportunities to get involved in sports and arts and, building leadership skills in their neighborhoods? How can they volunteer, be part of their community? How can we make sure there's safe spaces, for kids to be doing these activities? How can parents, get involved and be part of it? How can teachers, get involved? Because as you said, no one can do this by themselves. Yeah. It's going to take all of us coming together to, our vision is to make this the best place in the world to be a kid and to raise your family.
Oh, that's so good. And who doesn't want that?
Right?
Yeah. So when you heard about Planet Youth in Iceland, like if someone looked that up, what happened in Iceland? Like how did this help them?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you remember, but years ago there was some headlines that came out of Reykjavik how they actually had one of the worst substance use rates for alcohol in the whole world.
Wow.
And when they saw that, they got quite frightened, by that statistic. It was kind of a latchkey community. Parents were going into work, leaving the kids for the day. It was light out at midnight. Kids were going down in droves, downtown, at midnight, but it's light out. Wow. And they had a real challenge, with kids' behaviors around addiction to alcohol, smoking, bullying, theft. And so they created this Planet Youth program where they were able to bring parents and everyone together to look at survey results and then come up with actions right in those neighborhoods.
Wow.
Where the kids were with their parents and other natural supports to change those conditions. And over a 10-year period, they were able to go from, I think, over 85% of young people saying that they were drinking alcohol to one of the lowest rates in the world. I think it's down below 10 or or 5% now. So it was a radical change by bringing this community development prevention approach to Reykjavik.
And it's always inspiring to hear that that's possible.
Right? Yeah. And then the other thing is it's been replicated in other countries. So it's in over 20 other countries, in the world. We'll be the first large municipality in Western Canada. The Government of Canada is very supportive of Planet Youth through the Public Health Agency of Canada. And so there's some smaller Planet Youth programs starting up out east. But we are the largest city in Canada. And so we're all working together with a community of practice, to learn from these pilots that we're doing and to see how we can have an eye to scale it. For me, across Calgary, across Alberta, across Canada. I think that would be amazing if we could really get the energy to change these neighborhoods that our young people are growing up in and making sure that people can be natural supports for our young people.
Well, I'm in.
Yeah, well, look at all the work that you do.
Well, and I see it. I see it firsthand. And I love that it's a community approach. And we've chatted about our love for asset-based community development, right? Can you share a little bit about that, because that is such a part of all the work that you're doing in general, but also through this. Like, what would you say to someone who would ask, how does that work in my community?
Yeah, for sure. So really what it starts with is kind of building that local coalition. And so if you're talking about assets, getting to know the people in the neighborhood, getting to know sort of parents, that are interested in their youth well-being, getting to know teachers, getting to know your communities, and then quite often just knowing what kinds of assets are around. Are there schools in the neighborhood? Are there community associations? Are there play fields? Are there already coalitions of people gathering to do good work? And that's where I was saying before about even just walking around your neighborhood and sort of identifying it from an asset approach, can really change the mindset and really shift sort of your thinking around your community in terms of what is possible, what is already working well. And so we are trying to do our pilots in some neighborhoods that we've been doing the community hubs initiative, for example, because there's already some assets, that have been developed there, or working together through our All In For You schools, where we're already working on high school completion and trying neighborhoods like that, versus some neighborhoods that might be more of a desert for facilities and might not have as many programming or opportunities going on. But identifying those people that want to get involved and pulling them together, and then having some small investments, to try a few things. And so it's going to be something that, really starts to scale out now that we've done the survey, and there'll be opportunities for people to get involved, whether it's through the coalition in their neighborhoods, whether it's through our Indigenous parallel, whether it's through our youth engagement. We've been pulling together youth through our social impact lab and really just hearing from youth and what is it that they want, in their neighborhoods, and what is it that they need. And sometimes they're just saying, we want to be able to have relationships with adults, with healthy, caring adults. We want to have access to safe places. We're concerned about equity and inclusion and our sense of belonging. And so once you kind of know, what people or young people are concerned about, how can we then come together around what activities are already working in those neighborhoods? Maybe we just need to shine a light on them so people are aware that they can access them. There might be other activities in other parts of the city that we can bring to these neighborhoods. How can we make sure things are affordable and accessible so everybody has an opportunity to participate?
That's big.
Yeah, and then how can families and parents, get involved and, learn about what more they can do or how they can access, the resources. Something that was really good in Iceland was creating cafes and opportunities for parents to gather and to learn about what was available and how they could have more of a role in their community. And so it's really engaging at these different levels to kind of mobilize these communities towards action for their young people.
Yeah.
But not leaving the young people out of the decision making and making sure it's inclusive.
That's really good. And to hear from our young people that they want to be involved with adults that are supportive.
Yeah.
That's encouraging. I think that's a shift. I feel when I was a youth, we wanted independence.
That's right? Like we knew what to do.
And even though I think that's still a part of their DNA, definitely seeing the hunger for wanting to feel connected to the community again. And I think maybe because over time, the village has kind of dissipated a little bit, and now there's this new opportunity to come back to the village again.
Yeah, really, the whole thing about it takes a village, is really something that I believe with community development. And then how are all the different voices heard and listened to? Because we can also empower people like youth to have their own, gatherings. We were talking about, United for Youth and, how we can sort of get that leadership development for youth, going again in our community, but also working together in an integrated way. Because there's times when you need to be able to do it on your own, but then there's times where you want to come together as a community with healthy adults and, other natural supports and good environments that can create these opportunities. Because after all, these young people, we want to set them up for success. They're going to be running our city one day. And we want to make sure that they have every opportunity, to reach their full potential.
Isn't that true? I know in our own community, we have a youth leadership that meets on Friday nights.
Nice.
And they wanted to do a soapbox derby. And so that's where you build your own little push cart.
Oh, cool.
Kind of little go-kart, but without motors, and you race them down the hill. They wanted to do that. And so we also have a coalition of community members that want to create a great culture here in my community. And so those adults said, here's how we can come alongside them. And I do feel like more of that is probably needed. I
that grassroots work, right? Like getting at that neighborhood level. We're doing a lot of work with grassroots empowerment, at that level, bringing those grassroots voices in community. We also have such great network of community agencies, here in Calgary that have just mobilized through whether it was a flood or a pandemic or an affordability crisis. So we have such a caring city with so many people that want to get involved. And, I think if we all pull in that same direction, we can really make a big change and we can really set up people, to live a good life, to want to stay in Calgary, to want to raise your families here and, to be able to contribute to society in a healthy way, whether it's through volunteering, employment, getting involved, helping others. Because we all know when we do help others, it feels good.
It does.
Doesn't it? And, usually we're able to invest over $50 million every year in community and help over 200,000 people. And so when we do all pull together, it's just incredible the difference that we can make. And that's why I'm so passionate about United Way and the partners that we have, whether it's workplace, whether it's agency, government, volunteers, like yourself, that come out and really want to make Calgary a great city for everyone.
Yes. It is a unique city that way. Well, I would encourage everyone listening to get involved. Get involved in your community. If you're feeling disconnected, that's one of our problems in our world right now is disconnection. So the way we solve it is through connection.
That's right.
Getting involved.
Yeah, and even just your local community. like I said before, learning about your community association, getting out there, supporting some of the initiatives at the neighborhood level. If you work for a workplace, find out if they have a United Way campaign and get involved in that, or even just something like helping the senior down the street. Or if you see something that you can do nice for someone, those little acts of kindness can just change a person's day and just make all the difference. And you know what? You feel so good.
You do.
When you do an act of kindness like that.
Well, Karen, I just want to say thank you so much for your heart. And, it really does start in you. You're someone who models this. It's not just a position or a job. It's who you are.
Yeah, I think that's what, I get attracted to people who really are passionate. And that's why I've really enjoyed, watching your work too and seeing what you're doing in community. And when we get these like-minded people together, maybe we will just change the world.
Maybe we will. Yeah. Well, thanks for all you do. Keep going. And thanks everyone for listening.